In a busy garage, Elizabeth, the youngest and only woman mechanic around, was constantly looked down on by her coworkers. Things got worse when a heavily tattooed Hells Angels biker walked in, begging for urgent repairs so he could reach the hospital to save his injured daughter. Everyone in the garage turned their backs except Elizabeth, who stepped up to help. That decision cost her job when the manager fired her unfairly. But no one expected that the biker was the CEO's brother. And from that moment, everything would change. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so I can share more exciting stories with you tomorrow. The morning always began the same way for Elizabeth Brown, long before anyone else bothered to unlock the rusted side door of Brown's auto garage on Michigan Avenue. The sun rarely broke through the Chicago haze at that hour, leaving the street washed in a pale, steel-colored gloom. But Elizabeth liked that time, when the world felt quiet enough for her to breathe without someone reminding her she didn't belong there. The air inside the garage always carried a layered smell: burned rubber settled into concrete from decades of skidding tires, motor oil clinging to the walls like dark fingerprints, and the faint metallic sharpness of steel tools left unwashed overnight. It was a scent that had become, against everyone's expectations, her comfort. She walked through the back, fingers brushing against the cool metal of the tool drawers as she passed. Her palm still bore faint calluses from the first year she started working here, a 21-year-old girl who shocked every man in the shop by insisting she could rebuild a carburetor better than they could. Most never forgave her for saying it. The rest never forgot it. For the men who worked there, Elizabeth was a puzzle they didn't want to solve. The youngest. The only woman. The only black mechanic. To them, she existed in some half-space between employee and inconvenience, tolerated as long as she stayed quiet, stayed compliant, stayed invisible. And she had gotten used to that invisibility. Some days it shielded her from the sharp edges of their comments. Other days it felt like being swallowed whole. They called her Rookie every chance they got, not as a playful nickname, but as a reminder that her place in that shop wasn't earned, not in their eyes. She witnessed the same pattern daily: they'd walk past her without acknowledgement, take tools from her workstation without permission, and dismiss her suggestions even when they knew she was right. Still, she came. Because she loved engines, the way they revealed themselves slowly, piece by piece, as if trusting only those with enough patience to understand their language. Machines made sense in ways people didn't. Elizabeth moved toward her bay, pulling her hair back into a tight bun, her mind already sorting the day's expected tasks. She liked the predictability. The routine. The sense that if she kept her head down, she might get through another day without Lucas finding some reason to embarrass her. Mr. Lucas, the manager, carried an authority that always felt heavier when directed at her. He had a way of speaking that made every word feel like a verdict. His eyes lingered too long, always searching, waiting for a mistake. And when he didn't find one, he acted as though her competence was an insult to him personally. Elizabeth had learned to shrink around him, to fold her ambition beneath layers of politeness. Not because she lacked confidence, but because she understood the rules of survival in a place built to push her out. As she arranged her tools, she thought about how the garage used to be part of her family's story. Her grandfather had worked on cars his whole life. Her mother told stories of him rebuilding engines on the sidewalk outside their old apartment because he never trusted shops to treat him right. She wondered, sometimes, what he would think of her working here, whether he'd be proud she made it into a place that rarely opened doors for people like them, or worried about the walls she faced every day. Elizabeth's thoughts drifted as she checked her schedule for the morning. Nothing unusual. Tire replacements. A brake pad job. An inspection. The normal hum of labor she could carry out with her eyes closed. She told herself it wouldn't be a dramatic day. She liked the idea of that. For once, just getting through the hours without confrontation. But as the rest of the crew began to shuffle in, loud voices, heavy footsteps, the familiar cloud of judgment dragging behind them, the fragile calm of her quiet morning began to dissolve. Kyle was the first to speak to her, though his tone made it clear he didn't consider it speaking to her at all. He tossed a rag onto her workstation, letting it fall short of her hand. "Rookie, you better triple-check your work today. Lucas is already in one of his moods. Elizabeth didn't bother asking how he knew. Kyle always knew. The man treated Lucas like a prophet whose moods dictated the weather. She kept her voice even as she responded, without turning her head. I always check my work. Kyle chuckled, a low, patronizing sound that somehow managed to scrape down her spine. Yeah, but you know how it is. Some people need to try harder to be taken seriously. Elizabeth swallowed the retort that rose in her throat. She'd learned early that speaking up only widened the target on her back. Silence kept her balanced, even if it cost a small piece of her dignity each time. Lucas arrived moments later, striding through the garage with the entitlement of a man who believed he controlled not just the shop but the people in it. His eyes flicked toward Elizabeth the moment he entered. She recognized the look, the one he wore whenever he was searching for fault. His voice carried across the room. Rookie, don't forget to clean up that mess near the tire rack. Whoever left it obviously didn't think. Elizabeth paused. She knew she hadn't been near the tire rack the day before. But arguing would only give him more ammunition. I'll take care of it, she replied quietly. Lucas lifted an eyebrow. Good. At least you're learning to stay in line. The other mechanics snickered, some openly, others behind their hands. Elizabeth forced herself to breathe through the growing tension in her chest. She reminded herself that she wasn't here for them. She was here for the work. For the engines. For the promise that one day, she wouldn't have to fight twice as hard to be seen as half as capable. Still, moments like this sank their claws deeper than she liked to admit. Invisibility was one thing, an erasure she could live with. But humiliation was different. It lingered, staining the memory of even the calmest mornings. As she walked toward the tire rack to clean a mess she didn't create, she let her mind drift again, to the fantasy she rarely allowed herself to voice out loud. The fantasy of owning her own shop. A space where people weren't measured by gender or skin color but by skill, by integrity. A space where she wouldn't have to brace herself every time a supervisor walked by. But that dream felt miles away, hidden behind barriers that couldn't be crossed by hard work alone. And so, Elizabeth lowered her head and began sweeping the scattered debris across the concrete floor. Her movements were steady, almost rhythmic. Cleaning was a temporary surrender, but it was also survival. As she cleaned, she imagined wiping away not just the crumbs and dust left by another careless mechanic, but the condescension, the doubt, the invisible weight she carried every day. She didn't know it yet, but this ordinary morning, this quiet moment of sweeping the floor someone else messed up, would be the last day she ever accepted invisibility as her destiny. Because moments later, everything she knew about her life, her job, and her worth would be pushed into a collision course she couldn't have predicted. A collision brought to her by the roar of a desperate stranger barreling toward the garage door. The day she dreamed of escaping was the day everything she feared would finally erupt. And nothing in her life would ever be the same. The broom was still in Elizabeth's hands when the garage's uneasy morning rhythm broke. It started as a low rumble in the distance, subtle enough that the other mechanics ignored it, but Elizabeth felt it before she fully heard it. A vibration under her boots. A shift in the air. The unmistakable approach of a motorcycle pushed near its limits. She paused, eyes narrowing toward the open garage entrance. Moments later, a roaring Harley tore into view, slowing only at the last possible second. The bike wobbled as it came to an abrupt stop, too sharp, too desperate, and the man riding it barely managed to steady himself before his boots hit the ground. The mechanics turned. A few cursed under their breath. Kyle muttered something about trouble rolling in. But Elizabeth focused on the rider. He was large, broad-shouldered, tattoos visible even beneath his leather jacket, with the distinctive red and white patches marking him unmistakably, Hell's Angels. His breath came fast, uneven, as if he had been riding without stopping for miles. Sweat dripped down the side of his face despite the cold Chicago morning. He wasn't just tense, he was frantic. The man rushed forward, voice strained and raw. Someone. Please, I need help. My bike's dying on me. My daughter, she's in the hospital. Internal bleeding. They're prepping her for surgery and I need to get there before. His voice cracked. Elizabeth's chest tightened. The men around her exchanged glances, some amused, some annoyed, none sympathetic. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Sandra who practically worshipped Lucas, stepped forward with a sigh. "Sir, this is a scheduled service shop. If you don't have an appointment, you'll need to come back later." "I don't have later," the biker erupted, slamming a hand onto the counter. His entire body trembled with urgency. "The hospital's 40 minutes away and my engine's choking out. I just need someone, anyone, to tighten what's slipping so I can make it there." Sandra flinched back as if the desperation in his voice were an inconvenience rather than a plea. Kyle leaned against a toolbox, shaking his head. "We're not touching that thing. Last thing we need is some biker starting a fight because his junked ride gives out again." Another mechanic added, "Let him tow it like everyone else. Not our problem." The man's face shifted, fear bleeding into disbelief. "I'm telling you, my daughter is dying. I don't have time for a tow truck. Please." Elizabeth swallowed hard. His desperation hung heavy, stirring something in her, something she couldn't ignore. She could see the pain behind his eyes, the panic clinging to him like a second skin. Whatever people assumed about him, this wasn't a violent man looking for trouble. This was a father whose entire world was sitting in a hospital bed waiting for him. But Lucas stepped forward before Elizabeth could. His voice was cold. "Sir, unless you can pay for a full diagnostic and wait your turn in line, you're out of luck. We're not dropping paying customers for some emergency you created by riding a busted bike." The biker stared at him, stunned. "Is this really happening? You'd turn away a man trying to get to his child?" Lucas shrugged. "Rules are rules." Elizabeth felt heat rise in her chest. Rules were rules, unless it was one of the men who needed help, or unless Lucas wanted to look generous in front of someone he respected. She had watched him bend those rules 100 times. But now? When someone's daughter was fighting for her life? Suddenly the rules were made of steel. She looked at the bike. A Harley Softail, early model, the type that carried wear in predictable places. She had heard the engine sputter as it pulled in. She could guess the issue before even touching it. A loose throttle cable. Maybe a clogged fuel line. 15 minutes of work, 20 at most. She could fix it. And she knew it. Her grip tightened around the broom handle. The internal conflict tore through her, quiet but fierce. She wasn't supposed to act without permission. She wasn't supposed to challenge Lucas. She wasn't supposed to put herself in a situation that could end badly. She knew all of that. But she also knew she couldn't stand there and watch this man fall apart. Her heart whispered, "Help him." Her fear whispered, "You'll regret it." Lucas continued, waving the man toward the door. "Find another shop. You're wasting time here." The biker didn't move. He looked around the room, eyes landing on each mechanic one by one, searching for even a flicker of humanity. He didn't find it. Elizabeth felt the weight of that look settle over her. She recognized that expression. She had worn it herself, countless times, when pleading for fairness and receiving only indifference. Her broom lowered. Her feet began moving before she fully decided to move. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Sir," she spoke softly but firmly, "pop your hood. I'll look at it." The entire garage froze. Lucas's head snapped toward her. "Rookie. Don't." His voice was low, warning. But Elizabeth kept her eyes on the biker. She could see the hope flicker in his face, fragile but real. "Just let me take a look," she insisted. "If it's what I think it is, you'll be back on the road in minutes." Kyle scoffed loudly. "She thinks? You hear that? She thinks she knows Harleys now." The biker ignored them and nodded quickly, almost stumbling back to his bike. With shaking hands, he propped it upright, exposing the engine. Elizabeth crouched beside it, her breath steadying as her fingers hovered over the heat-warmed metal. She didn't touch anything yet, didn't break the unspoken barrier fully, but she leaned close enough to assess it. Her eyes narrowed. Her suspicion was right. She turned back to the biker. "It's fixable. I can do it now." The man nearly collapsed with relief. But Lucas's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Step away from that bike, Elizabeth." She ignored him. "You don't understand," the biker whispered to her. "She's only 12. I can't lose her." Elizabeth met his gaze. "Then let me help." His eyes shone with gratitude so raw it made her throat tighten. She rose to grab her tools. But Lucas stepped directly in her path. His voice was a quiet snarl. "If you touch that bike, you're finished here." Her heart pounded. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stop. To retreat. To choose safety over compassion. But another voice, stronger, clearer, rose inside her. "Some lives are worth more than job security." She stepped around Lucas. And for the first time since working there, she didn't shrink. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for permission. She walked toward the bike with purpose. The shop watched in stunned silence. Elizabeth set her tools beside the Harley. She began to work. Elizabeth's hands moved with precision over the Harley's engine, fingers tracing familiar paths as if the metal itself could guide her. The air around her smelled of heated metal and engine oil, but beneath it lay the tension of the garage like a storm waiting to break. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, the skeptical glares, the whispered mutterings. She ignored them. Her attention was focused entirely on the man who crouched beside her bike, his hand brushing against the leather seat as if holding it might tether him to hope. "Throttle cable," she muttered under her breath, almost as if saying it out loud would summon the problem. Her fingers nudged it into place. The tension was perfect. She checked the fuel line, noticing a small kink near the carburetor. Minutes passed in the rhythm of clicks, twists, and tightening bolts. The biker watched her, tense but silent, like a man holding his breath in a storm. Kyle cleared his throat behind her. "You really think you can do this? You're a rookie playing with a real Harley. One wrong move, and what?" Elizabeth didn't look at him, didn't rise to the bait. "I've done this before. Engines don't care about who you are. They care about what you do." Lucas came closer, towering over her, his shadow falling across the bike. "You're risking everything, Elizabeth. You think I'll let some black girl play mechanic while I run my shop?" His words were deliberate, venomous. The others laughed quietly, some openly, a few pretending not to notice. Elizabeth's jaw tightened, but she continued her work. She let her hands speak the only language that mattered here. Each twist, each adjustment, was a statement. She knew her craft. She understood machines in a way they didn't, and perhaps, a way they would never understand. The biker leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. You really think you can get me to the hospital in time?" Elizabeth glanced at him, determination softening her eyes. "I can. But you need to trust me. I know what I'm doing." Lucas' face twisted. "Trust? You want him to trust a girl in grease-stained overalls? This is a shop, not a charity." Elizabeth's hands froze for a moment. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to surrender. But she remembered the desperation in his eyes, the weight of a father's fear for his child. And then, something snapped inside her. "You don't get to make that decision," she said, voice low but firm. "Not for him. Not for me. Not for anyone here." Lucas laughed, dark and cold. "You're challenging me, rookie. You think you can defy me? Watch your mouth, girl." Elizabeth's internal monologue flared. "I've stayed small too long. I've folded to every insult, every dismissal. Today isn't about me. Today isn't about fear. It's about doing what's right." Her hands returned to the throttle cable. She tightened the bolts and aligned the fuel line, moving with a confidence that demanded attention. Sweat rolled down her temple. She didn't flinch, though the tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Kyle muttered under his breath, "She's crazy." But Elizabeth didn't care. She had made her choice. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. The biker exhaled shakily. I can't thank you enough." "You don't have time," Elizabeth said. "We need to get you on the road." She twisted the ignition key. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then roared to life. The sound filled the garage, shaking dust from the rafters, shaking the disbelief out of the men who had been watching. Lucas' eyes narrowed, fury rising. "Stop. That bike doesn't move without my say." Elizabeth ignored him. She looked at the biker, and for the first time, his tense shoulders relaxed slightly. She gave a nod. "Go. Now." The biker started the Harley, the engine steady and confident beneath his hands. He didn't hesitate. He glanced back at her. "Thank you. I'll never forget this." Lucas' face was crimson with rage. "You're done here, rookie. Don't think I won't make you regret this." Elizabeth straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "I'll take my chances. Some things are bigger than fear, Lucas. Some things are bigger than you." The other mechanics shifted uncomfortably. The quiet among them was heavy, thick with tension. None of them had expected her to act. None of them had expected her to win. And for a moment, the shop felt smaller, constrained by the magnitude of one person's courage. The biker kicked his foot onto the ground, steadying the Harley, and paused before leaving. He looked at her again, this time with something like awe. "You saved her. My daughter, you saved her life." Elizabeth felt the heat rise in her chest. Relief, fear, pride, and exhaustion collided inside her. "Go," she said again. "And make sure they know what happened." As he roared out of the garage, Lucas slammed a wrench onto the counter, making everyone flinch. "That's it," he barked. "You're fired. Get your things and leave. Now." Elizabeth froze for a second. "Fire? Here? Now?" Her chest tightened as she registered his words. Her internal monologue flickered between disbelief and indignation. "I did the right thing. I saved a life. And this is my punishment?" She turned slowly to him. "For helping someone in need? For doing your job when you refused?" Lucas' eyes burned with anger. "For disobeying me? For thinking you're more important than my authority? For being what you are?" His last words spat out with a venom that left no doubt, his prejudice was raw, unfiltered. A black girl trying to play mechanic in a man's shop. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The room fell silent. Even the other mechanics seemed unsure whether to laugh or shrink back. Some hid their discomfort behind smirks. Others whispered excuses to themselves. None of them stepped forward. Elizabeth's hands trembled, not from fear but from fury and disbelief. She had been prepared for their derision, for subtle disrespect, for quiet undermining, but never for this brazen, hateful condemnation. Her internal monologue raced. "I cannot let this define me. I cannot let him erase what I did. I cannot." But the moment passed. She exhaled slowly, refusing to let tears rise. Pride mingled with anger. "They'll remember this day," she told herself. "This isn't the end." Lucas continued, voice dripping with authority and prejudice. "Consider yourself warned, girl. No one crosses me and gets away with it." Elizabeth squared her shoulders. "I don't cross people. I help them. That's the difference." The other mechanics avoided eye contact, but Elizabeth noticed a few subtle nods, small acknowledgments that someone had seen courage in the room, that someone had recognized her strength. Lucas spun on his heel and left, muttering threats under his breath. The garage exhaled collectively, the tension slowly dissipating. But Elizabeth stayed where she was, hands on her hips, surveying the aftermath. Her heart was pounding. Adrenaline was still screaming through her veins. But the truth had crystallized, doing the right thing had a cost, but it also demanded courage. She had crossed that line, and she knew the repercussions were only beginning. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She had acted according to her values, and no threat, no prejudice, no authority could take that away. Her gaze drifted toward the street, the direction the biker had vanished into, and she allowed herself a brief moment of hope. Somewhere out there, a child's life had been protected because she had chosen courage over compliance. Elizabeth turned back to the shop. The air felt heavier, the floor colder, the walls lined with judgment, but she stood taller than she had that morning. The confrontation was only the beginning. And deep inside, she understood that the true battle, the real reckoning, was still ahead. The day that had begun as ordinary had become irrevocably extraordinary. The garage seemed to shrink in size as Lucas stormed back through the sliding door, slamming it hard enough that the metal rattled against its track. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation, a dangerous combination that made the air feel charged, as if static electricity had settled between the walls. Elizabeth stood her ground, every instinct telling her to remain calm, even as her stomach coiled with tension. "You!" Lucas bellowed, pointing a finger like a weapon. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you understand the chaos you caused? Do you even grasp what it means to defy me?" Elizabeth didn't flinch. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. "I did what needed to be done. Someone's life was at stake." Lucas laughed bitterly, a sound that made several of the mechanics flinch. "Life? Don't give me that sanctimonious crap. You think this is about life? This is about authority. This is about respect. And you, rookie, have none." The other mechanics shuffled uncomfortably. A few avoided looking at her. Some whispered to each other, casting furtive glances. None dared to speak. They had all seen Lucas' temper before. They all knew what he was capable of. But the venom now was sharper, more personal. "You," Lucas' voice cracked. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Pack your things and get out." The words fell like a hammer. Elizabeth's pulse raced, but she refused to let panic claim her. Her mind ran through the injustice, the humiliation, the blatant discrimination she had endured from the day she started. The anger that had been simmering for years now flared, hot and fierce. "You can't do this," she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "I saved a life. I acted when no one else would. And now you're punishing me for it?" Lucas sneered, stepping closer. "I can do whatever I want. You should have stayed in your place. That's what the shop is for, learning your limits. And your limits, rookie, are right where I tell you they are." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "Limits?" she thought. "My limits are defined by my courage, not your prejudice." He leaned closer, his breath sharp, the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes clinging to him. "You think you're special because you did one thing right. You think one act of defiance wipes away the fact that you're, you. A black girl pretending to be a mechanic in a man's shop. You're lucky I don't make sure no one else here respects you." The insult hit with more than words. It carried years of systemic bias, 1,000 microaggressions boiled down into one explosive declaration. Elizabeth's fists clenched. She could feel the sting of injustice burn along her nerves, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay grounded. "I'm done being invisible," she said quietly, so that only Lucas could hear. "And I refuse to be diminished by your hatred or your fear." Lucas barked laughter, cruel and mocking. "Invisible? Diminished? You've been nothing but a nuisance since the day you walked in here. And now you want to lecture me?" Elizabeth's mind flashed to every small humiliation she had endured, the whispered jokes, the rolling eyes, the dismissive comments. Every rookie call-out that had eroded her self-worth. Every moment she had swallowed pride for the sake of survival. And now she saw the pattern clearly. Lucas wasn't just punishing her for her choice, he was punishing her for existing as she was, competent, black, and female in a place that refused to see her as fully human. She straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. I exist. And I've earned my place. Not because you say so, but because I've proven it. And you will answer for this, whether you like it or not. Lucas' face turned red with rage. He glared at the others, trying to rally support. Am I clear? Pack it up. Now. Or I'll make you regret it. Some mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. One or two muttered under their breath, but none moved to defend her. The room felt like a pressure cooker, every second stretching into eternity. Elizabeth realized how alone she was, and yet, strangely, she didn't feel powerless. The act of choosing courage had given her strength she hadn't known she possessed. Lucas turned back to her, voice now dripping with venom. I'll have you blacklisted from every garage in this city. Do you understand me? Elizabeth's internal monologue surged. I've faced humiliation before. I've faced doubt. I've faced men who refuse to see me as equal. I will face them again if I must. But I will not step back from what is right. Her voice rang out clear, cutting through the oppressive weight of the shop. Do your worst. I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. Lucas' jaw tightened. You'll regret this. He pivoted toward the door, his stride heavy with authority. Everyone else, get back to work. Let her leave. Elizabeth didn't move immediately. She took a moment to glance around the shop, at the men who had mocked, doubted, and ignored her for years. Some avoided her eyes, shame flickering briefly before they looked away. Others whispered quietly to one another, unwilling to acknowledge the storm that had erupted in their midst. Her gaze settled on Kyle, whose smug confidence had evaporated under the weight of Lucas' fury and her defiance. His expression betrayed more fear than contempt now. Even they see it, she thought. Even they know the truth of what I did. She turned back to the biker's spot where the Harley had been. Empty now. He was gone, riding toward the hospital, toward hope, and toward life. She allowed herself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. She had made a difference. She had acted when no one else would. That truth, though invisible to Lucas, burned bright within her. And then Lucas' voice cut through the tension again, aimed at her like a weapon. Take your things. You're done here. Effective immediately. Elizabeth felt the sting of public humiliation. Every insult he had hurled, every derogatory phrase about her race and gender, now hung in the air like a noose. Her chest ached with indignation, and yet she refused to bow. She gathered her few personal items, not in defeat but with deliberate composure, her mind racing ahead to the fight she knew was coming. Her internal monologue sharpened into resolve. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and met the eyes of the other mechanics one by one, silently asserting her dignity. Some looked away. Some studied her with newfound respect. And in that quiet, Elizabeth realized that her courage had already begun to ripple, even if subtly, through the room. Lucas watched her pack, fury coiled tightly in his body, but Elizabeth didn't flinch. She had crossed a line that could not be erased. She had acted with integrity, with humanity, with courage. And that, she knew, no amount of prejudice or authority could take from her. When she finally stepped toward the door, Lucas called after her, voice low and dangerous, "You think this ends here? You've made a mistake you'll regret." Elizabeth paused in the doorway, not turning back. "No, Lucas. The mistake was ever thinking I'd let fear define me." She walked out into the street, the weight of judgment heavy on her shoulders, but the fire of vindication burning even brighter in her chest. She didn't yet know the full consequences of her actions, the backlash, the rumors, the fight that awaited, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she had chosen courage over fear. And that choice, small as it seemed, was about to set a chain of events in motion that would change everything. Lucas slumped back against a workbench, rage coiled tight in his fists, realizing he had unleashed a storm he could not control. For the first time, Elizabeth felt the power of being seen, not through the lens of bias or dismissal, but as someone who had acted with conviction and refused to back down. In that moment, the garage felt smaller, the air heavier, the walls lined with judgment, but Elizabeth had stepped out of their reach. And though she did not yet know it, the world outside that door would soon recognize her worth in ways Lucas could never prevent. Elizabeth's hands were still dusty from the grease she had wiped on her rag when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She had just stepped outside, the cold Chicago wind tugging at the edges of her jacket, and she almost ignored it. Almost. But something made her pause. The number on the screen wasn't familiar. She hesitated, then answered. Elizabeth Brown, a deep, calm voice said. It carried authority, not anger, not condescension. Just wait. This is Thomas Ellison. I'm calling about your actions today. Her pulse quickened. Ellison. The name alone carried more authority than anyone in her immediate world. She had heard it whispered in the industry, the CEO of one of the most influential automotive companies in the Midwest, a man whose word could open or close doors across the city. Yes, sir, she said cautiously. I don't understand. No, you understand perfectly, he interrupted gently, but firmly. I've been briefed. About the incident with the biker, about your refusal to stand down, and about how Mr. Lucas treated you. Elizabeth froze, disbelief mingling with confusion. You know my name? You know what happened? Yes. And I know it wasn't an act of defiance for the sake of defiance. You helped someone when everyone else refused. You acted with integrity when no one else would. His voice carried a calm authority that made the chaos of the garage feel distant, almost unreal. Elizabeth's mind raced. Integrity. Help someone. The humiliation, the anger, the public firing, all of it collided with this unexpected recognition. Sir, thank you, she said, her voice soft, trembling with relief and disbelief. There's more, Ellison continued. The man you helped, Ray Ellison, is my brother. He told me everything. How you fixed his bike, how you didn't hesitate, how you treated his situation as urgent when others didn't even glance in his direction. Elizabeth's breath caught. Ray Ellison. Her mind flashed to the biker's desperate face, the fear in his eyes, the way he had clutched the leather seat as if his daughter's life depended on it. She hadn't known who he was, hadn't recognized him beyond the jacket and tattoos. And now she realized she had just helped someone whose family wielded immense influence. Your actions, Thomas Ellison continued, were not only courageous, they were necessary. And they should never have been met with the treatment you received. Elizabeth struggled to find words. The weight of injustice, humiliation, and rage she had carried all day seemed to collide with something new, validation. Recognition. The acknowledgement that her choice had mattered. That her integrity had been seen. There's no excuse for Lucas' behavior, Ellison said. I've already terminated his employment. Effective immediately. His conduct was discriminatory, unjustifiable, and will not be tolerated. Elizabeth felt her hands tremble. The relief was a tidal wave she hadn't expected. He's gone. Yes. And that's not all. I want to offer you a promotion, Elizabeth. Lead technician. Your own team. Increased pay. The authority to implement the standards you've demonstrated today, without interference. For a moment, the street, the garage, the cold wind, all of it, seemed to fade away. Her mind spun. Lead technician. Recognition. Respect. Authority. A future she had dared to imagine but had never thought possible in a place where she had always been treated as invisible. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Ellison replied. You've already spoken with your actions. Now, I want you to speak with your leadership. The shop, and those who work here, need someone with your integrity and skill at the helm. Elizabeth sank onto the curb outside the garage, heart hammering. She thought of Lucas, the venom in his words, the weight of systemic bias he had tried to pin on her shoulders. She thought of every snicker, every eye roll, every dismissal. And now, just hours later, it was all reversed. She had been vindicated. Recognized. Empowered. Her mind drifted briefly to Ray, to the biker whose desperation had forced her hand. She remembered his eyes, wide, pleading, terrified, and how every instinct had told her to step forward despite the danger, despite the disapproval, despite Lucas' authority. It was worth it, she thought. It was always worth it. Ellison's voice brought her back. I want you to report to the office tomorrow. We'll finalize the details. And Elizabeth, thank you. Thank you for your courage, your skill, and your character. You've reminded us all why integrity matters. Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, not with humiliation, but with a sense of possibility she had never allowed herself to feel. As she hung up, she stared at the garage across the street. Lucas' tyranny, the derision of her coworkers, the suffocating weight of their disbelief, all of it had been real, and all of it had been undone. And yet she knew the fight wasn't over. Vindication was one thing, but the scars of prejudice, of humiliation, and of authority misused would take longer to erase. She would have to prove herself again, not to the CEO, not even to Ray, but to a world that had never expected her to rise. For the first time that day, Elizabeth allowed herself a smile, a brief but fierce acknowledgement of how far she had come. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, visible. Seen. Powerful in a way that wasn't loud, wasn't boastful, but was undeniable. The revelation of Ray's identity, the CEO's recognition, and Lucas' firing had shifted the balance. The garage, the men who had doubted her, the system that had tried to push her out, they would never define her again. And yet, as she stood to walk back inside, Elizabeth understood that her journey was just beginning. Leadership, respect, and the restoration of integrity were challenges that demanded resilience. She was ready. She had to be. For a long moment, she let herself imagine the future, a team that looked up to her, a garage that respected her skills, a workplace free from bias. A life where her courage had consequences not just for her, but for those who would follow. And in that moment, the first true sense of victory settled over her like a warmth she had never known, the knowledge that doing the right thing, even in the face of fear and prejudice, could change everything. Elizabeth took a deep breath, pulled the grease-stained rag from her pocket, and straightened her shoulders. She was no longer the invisible rookie. She was a mechanic. A leader. Someone whose choices carried weight and whose courage had been seen. And as the sun broke through the haze just slightly, illuminating the Chicago street, she felt the promise of the future, the challenge, the vindication, the power of being truly recognized. The battle against injustice was far from over, but for the first time, Elizabeth knew she had won a decisive victory. Elizabeth arrived at the garage the next morning with a sense of purpose she had never carried before. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of early November, and the faint scent of oil and asphalt hung in the air as if the city itself held its breath. Today was different. She could feel it in the shift of the wind, the stillness of the street, the weight of expectation pressing not just on her shoulders but on the entire block. Inside, the garage was quiet, too quiet. The mechanics went about their routines with the nervous tension of people waiting for something monumental to happen, though none of them would admit it aloud. Elizabeth had been promoted to lead technician, but Lucas' presence, or, rather, the shadow of his influence, still lingered in the corners. He hadn't left quietly. Rumors, whispers, and subtle sabotage had already begun, like a slow poison creeping into the shop. Emails had been sent to clients, falsely suggesting Elizabeth's work was shoddy, unreliable. Online reviews had appeared overnight, claiming incompetence, carelessness, and lack of experience. Even as the CEO's endorsement had arrived, Lucas had found ways to undermine her credibility. Elizabeth's hands rested on the counter as she surveyed the room. She knew the storm was coming. And she knew it would take more than authority on paper to restore trust, not just in her, but in the integrity of the garage itself. And then she saw him. Ray Ellison, the biker whose life she had inadvertently saved, walked through the doors. His presence was commanding, larger than life, and yet not intimidating, an authority born of experience and gratitude. Behind him, nearly 300 bikers had gathered silently, forming a tide of support she had not anticipated. Their patches, their leather jackets, their roaring engines waiting just outside, made the air vibrate with an energy that was both thrilling and terrifying. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. This was bigger than she had imagined. This was no longer just about a promotion, no longer just about vindication from the CEO. This was public accountability. This was Lucas facing the truth in a way he could not manipulate. Lucas emerged from the back office, his expression twisting from smug confidence to disbelief as the bikers filled the garage doors. "What is this?" he demanded, voice cracking. "Who authorized this?" Elizabeth stepped forward, her shoulders squared. "No one authorized it, Lucas. But the truth doesn't need permission." Ray's voice rang out, steady and controlled. "Lucas, we have all the evidence you've tried to hide, the emails, the false reviews, the intimidation. Your actions are documented. Your lies are exposed." Lucas' face went red. He opened his mouth, trying to assert control, but the sheer weight of witness, evidence, and moral authority left him speechless. He stepped back, flailing, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Elizabeth felt a strange surge of calm. The fear she had felt earlier, the humiliation, the worry, was replaced by a clarity she had never known. Today, the world would see her courage not as defiance, not as a threat, but as the truth of her character. Ray continued. She acted when no one else would. She didn't hesitate. She didn't consider herself above or below anyone. She acted because it was the right thing to do. And you, Lucas, thought that your authority and prejudice could erase that. It can't. A murmur ran through the room. The other mechanics shifted uncomfortably. Some looked ashamed. Some avoided eye contact. None could deny what was happening. The tide of truth had risen, and they were swept along in its current. Elizabeth's internal monologue ran like a quiet drumbeat. This is justice. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Just accountability. This is what happens when courage meets integrity. Lucas' voice faltered. I didn't. Ray held up a hand. We have every message you sent, every review you created, every attempt to sabotage her. It's all here. You will answer for it. And yes, there will be legal consequences. The anger, the fear, the desperation, all of it in Lucas' face now mirrored the power shift that had been occurring since Elizabeth made her choice. She was no longer the rookie. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, and she was supported by people who understood her worth. The bikers shifted as one, their presence an unspoken force that made Lucas take a step back. His arrogance had no purchase here. His authority, once absolute within these walls, had evaporated under the weight of truth and solidarity. Elizabeth turned to the mechanics. I know some of you doubted me, she said quietly, firmly. Some of you stayed silent when it would have been easier to speak. But today, you see what happens when integrity is met with courage. You see what happens when the right choice is made, even when it's costly. A few heads nodded. Small, tentative acknowledgments, but significant. A ripple of recognition that the shop was no longer a place of fear, but a place of accountability. Lucas' attempts to speak were drowned out by the voices of the bikers outside, their engines revving, a low, steady roar that filled the garage and the street beyond. Ray's eyes met Elizabeth's. He nodded once. A gesture of gratitude, validation, and partnership. Elizabeth, he said, voice clear and unwavering. You didn't just fix a bike today. You fixed a system that tried to crush you. And you reminded everyone here that courage and competence are stronger than prejudice and lies. We have your back. Elizabeth's chest tightened. Relief, pride, and determination all mingled into a fierce, almost overwhelming sensation. She straightened her shoulders, standing taller than she had in years. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying across the garage. But the work isn't done. We need to rebuild trust here. We need to show our clients, our colleagues, and ourselves what true leadership looks like. Ray smiled, a quiet, approving smile. Then lead. And we'll follow. The bikers began filing out, engines starting, tires crunching against asphalt. Their presence had made the statement public, undeniable, unassailable. Lucas, still staggering under the weight of exposure, could only watch. And when the police arrived shortly after, armed with the documentation Ray and Elizabeth had compiled, his resistance crumbled entirely. Arrested for discrimination, intimidation, and sabotage, Lucas' power evaporated. Elizabeth stood at the center of the garage, breathing in the aftermath. The walls that had once felt constrictive now felt like a testament to what she had endured and what she had overcome. The mechanics, once complicit in silence, now looked to her, not with doubt, not with condescension, but with recognition, curiosity, and tentative respect. Her promotion to lead technician was no longer just a title. It was a symbol of earned trust, of integrity meeting opportunity. She would guide the team, implement standards, and lead with the values she had demonstrated when it mattered most. Elizabeth felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, heavy but not oppressive. For the first time, she understood that visibility, authority, and respect weren't just gifts, they were earned through courage, persistence, and unwavering commitment to what was right. As she began organizing her new team, she noticed subtle changes: tools laid out properly, mechanics working with quiet efficiency, the air charged not with tension but with anticipation. Change had begun. Not everywhere at once, but in ways that mattered. Her gaze drifted toward the street where the bikers had departed. The roar of engines faded, leaving behind a residual echo of solidarity. Elizabeth smiled faintly. The world had witnessed her courage. The injustice had been exposed. The community had rallied, not just for her, but for the principle she embodied: integrity above fear, truth above lies, action above hesitation. She inhaled deeply, feeling the cold Chicago wind against her face, and for the first time, Elizabeth Brown knew she was not alone, not invisible, and not powerless. The garage had been transformed, yes, but so had she. And in that transformation, she realized something profound: true leadership was not about authority or fear, it was about courage, vision, and the willingness to stand when everyone else stayed silent. Elizabeth turned back to her team, ready to lead them into a new era, a space defined not by the prejudices of the past, but by the integrity of the choices she had made, the truth she had uncovered, and the courage she had demonstrated when it mattered most. Today, she was no longer the rookie. She was no longer unseen. She was visible, powerful, and ready to guide the people who had once doubted her toward a future defined by respect, accountability, and excellence. The streets of Chicago, the garage, the lives she touched, they had all witnessed her rise. And this was only the beginning. The garage smelled different that morning, not just oil and metal, but something subtler: possibility. Elizabeth breathed it in, letting it settle in her chest. The roar of the city outside felt less oppressive, less chaotic. Chicago hadn't changed, not in any grand way, but something inside her had shifted, irrevocably. She ran her fingers over the tool bench, the edges worn smooth from years of work, of struggle, of proving herself in small increments. Each mark, each dent, was a memory of endurance, of standing against doubt, of insisting on her worth when the world refused to acknowledge it. Elizabeth walked through the garage, noticing small details she had ignored before: a bolt left slightly loose, a rag draped over a toolbox, a sheen of grease on the floor. She moved with a calm authority now, each step measured, deliberate. Her team watched her, not with skepticism but with curiosity and respect. The walls no longer pressed in, they seemed to open, breathing with her. She paused at the window, watching the street beyond. The Harley that had started it all was gone, the biker who had unknowingly catalyzed her transformation riding toward hope with his daughter alive and safe. Elizabeth smiled faintly. She thought of him, of the gratitude in his eyes, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with recognition or reward. It was the quiet satisfaction of having done right, unmediated by approval or applause. Her internal monologue was soft, reflective. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer small. I am no longer defined by the limitations others tried to impose on me. She glanced at her reflection in the window: grease-stained overalls, hair pulled back, eyes steady and bright. The girl who had walked into the garage months ago, timid, tentative, unsure, was gone. In her place stood someone forged in the fires of courage and integrity. Someone who had acted when it mattered most, and had emerged stronger for it. Elizabeth turned back to her team, who had gathered around a project she had assigned. Their movements were tentative but purposeful. She gave them a nod, a silent affirmation. Leadership, she realized, was not about commanding fear but inspiring confidence. It was about creating space for others to rise alongside her. The memory of Lucas' venom, of the insults, of the humiliation, no longer weighed heavily. They were reminders of the world she had navigated, the battles she had fought, the courage she had summoned. They were evidence of the transformation she had undergone. Elizabeth knelt beside a young mechanic adjusting a carburetor, guiding his hands with care. "Check the alignment here," she instructed, voice calm and precise. He nodded, absorbing the guidance with a seriousness he hadn't displayed before. She realized she was no longer just fixing machines, she was shaping people, molding confidence, passing on the lessons she had learned under fire. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the CEO's call, to the bikers' solidarity, to the public vindication that had dismantled years of doubt. Each event had been a turning point, a revelation of how courage, skill, and integrity could ripple outward, touching others in ways she hadn't imagined. Elizabeth stood, straightened, and surveyed the garage once more. The space felt alive, vibrant, full of potential. Her presence was no longer questioned. Her skill was no longer underestimated. Her voice carried weight. Her decisions mattered. She had crossed the threshold from invisible to visible, from marginalized to respected, from rookie to leader. And in that quiet moment, Elizabeth understood something essential: transformation is not a single act or a moment of triumph. It is the accumulation of choices made in the face of fear, the insistence on integrity when the world resists it, the refusal to let prejudice define your path. She exhaled, feeling the tension of months, no, years, slide away. Her eyes lifted toward the sunlight breaking through clouds over Michigan Avenue, the warmth touching her face like a benediction. She had emerged not unscathed, but unbowed. Not untouched, but undefeated. Elizabeth smiled again, this time fully, finally. She was no longer the girl called rookie and dismissed. She was a leader, a mechanic, a human whose worth could not be questioned. And the transformation she had fought for, bled for, and earned, would ripple far beyond these walls, shaping the garage, the community, and herself in ways that no prejudice, no authority, and no act of injustice could ever undo. She turned to her team, her voice gentle but commanding. "Let's get to work. There's a lot to do, and now, we know exactly what we're capable of." And as the first tools clinked against metal and engines hummed to life, Elizabeth Brown felt the full weight and joy of her transformation. She had become visible, unshakable, and ready to lead, not just in the garage, but in every space that had ever tried to deny her. The road ahead was long. The challenges were many. But she had discovered something unassailable: her courage, her integrity, and her vision would guide her. Always. And with that, the garage, once a place of marginalization, had become a sanctuary of respect, competence, and hope. Elizabeth walked among her team, confident, unyielding, transformed. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.